great to have you here at Stirchley Community Church for the Stirchley exhibition. Yeah, a little bit of a whoop there. But just great to be together this evening, and looking forward to handing over to Phil and Sandra just in a moment. I'll introduce them. But yeah, part of the Stirchley exhibition, some will know that this church is celebrating 50 years since it moved into this building, and celebrating that. We've done a number of events throughout the year. We had an art competition that will be on display again tomorrow for those that are coming along tomorrow. Then we had a celebration here, a bit of a party in the building itself as the church community, just thanking those that have been part of that and just celebrating together. And then in June, earlier this year, we had what we called Stirchley Heroes Awards evening. So we wanted to just really connect with the community, thank those that play their part across Stirchley and maybe some of the surrounding areas. And yeah, we wanted to take this opportunity not just to give thanks as a church, but to recognise there's so many great things happening in our community and in our local area. So tonight is a little bit of an extension of that. We wanted to, over the next few days, take a chance to look back at the past of what's happened in this area over the years, and we're really privileged to have Phil and Sandra from the Stirchley History Group to just give a presentation tonight of some of those things. And just a little bit of a heads up as well, there will be a Q&A afterwards. So if you've got some questions maybe you've already thought of or you'd love to find out and ask, hold on to them. There'll be a space afterwards. Or maybe something that they share from their presentation tonight that you think, oh, that's really fascinating, I didn't know about that. I'd like to know more about it. So yeah, we're really excited about this exhibition. There's more details of what's going to happen tomorrow and on Sunday. I'll share a little bit about that as we wrap up. But yeah, can we just give a round of applause to Phil and Sandra as they come and just bring the presentation this evening. Thank you.
Right, well, thanks very much, Matthew, and thank you for inviting us. It's really a privilege to be doing this. First challenge is to unlock my laptop. So there we go. Okay.
And although there's a microphone there, we're going to try and not use a microphone because I get distracted by my own voice.
Okay. Yes. So we're not here primarily to promote ourselves, but the first slide, if you're able to see it, just talk about ourselves. All you need to know really, you can search for Stirchley History Group online. You'll find us especially on social media. But the most important thing is that we meet at Stirchley Baths on the second Thursday of each month at 7 o'clock. So we'll just leave that there. Okay. So the next thing to talk about is just say we're going to try and cover a lot of ground tonight. There's more information at the back there. But we're trying to, in our talk, we're going to try and focus perhaps on the lesser known topics, rather than the things that everybody might know about. But we're going to have to miss out huge chunks of information. We've had to be quite brutal, really. And we're also ready to nudge each other to get us to move on. And Sandra's already glaring at me to say, get on with it. Okay, so let's get on to the next slide. I've got a quote for you. I'd like to listen to this carefully, so I'm going to ask you in a minute when you think this quote was actually made. First thing I need to tell you, it talks about Stirchley Street, which is one of the old names for this area. It used to be known as Stirchley Street. It was also known for a long time as Strutley. And during the 19th century, the two names were used pretty much interchangeably. Strutley died out really towards the end of the 19th century. So listen carefully. About a mile and a quarter northeast of Kings Norton has a post office, a police station, a board school and a railway station. Notwithstanding these signs of modern civilization and the near proximity of Cadbury's cocoa manufactory, Stirchley Street is, as it has been for many a generation, a favourite country outing for weary brums having a chance out to spend on change of scene. Not quite contemporary, that one, as you might guess. So on the next slide, I'm going to give you four choices as to when you think it might have been written. So 1865, 1885, 1900, 1910. Anybody going for 1865? One hand there. 1885? A couple more cautious hands there. 1900? A few more hands there. 1910? Okay. Okay. It is actually 1885. So well done if you got that. But don't be ashamed if you didn't, because a lot of those things that were referred to there, like the railway station, the police station, and Cadbury's, they were actually still quite new at that time. But the reference to the country, the country area, it was actually already dying. You know, the farms were already disappearing at that point. So as more and more infrastructure came along, especially housing, to create more of the Stirchley that we know today, it was really on the turn at that point. What I'd like to do now is take you back a generation to about the 1850s. So the next map on the screen will show you from. You won't be able to see the detail on that one, but I'll just point out some of the major features. Some of these still survive to this day. So the thick line, slightly to the left there, going north to south, is a canal. Obviously, that has not really changed. Through the middle is the line of Pershore Road with a gyrator system. Of course, we're right in the middle of it right now. As we say, Stirchley's been gyrating since the 1840s. And the way it came about was that Stirchley, the High Street as we now know it, was originally part of the Roman road. Icknield Street, you can still follow the line down Lifford Lane and well into Worcestershire. But nobody's quite sure what happened to it beyond this point. People have tried to find it but not been able to. But in about 1825, an Act of Parliament was passed authorising building a turnpike, which was to go from Birmingham to Pershore. And so a new road was driven through Selly Park, the long stretch through Selly Park, which had been part of the Selly Hall estate. And so all the straight bits were joined up. And so that's why we've got the straight bit at the back of us now to form the gyrator system. And what that meant was that the area now became more suitable for housing and for farming. And so gradually the land was sold off plot by plot. And that's really one of the things that really started the change in the area. So the splashing of buildings were then supplemented by a lot more housing. And although it's very small detail on the map there was a toll gate just beyond where it was now the Bournebrook Inn was the Three Horseshoes. So it was a turnpike. So it was obviously the tolls that funded the building and the maintenance of the road. And then to the east we've got the River Ray flowing through. But the line of the Ray has actually changed quite a lot over the years. There's been a lot of engineering work done to it. And in the 19th century, there were several mills along the river. Nearby, there was Hazelwell Mill and Dogpool Mill, and each had a mill race, an artificial mill stream that was built. But the river, even the river itself now follows a different line. So it's been engineered quite a lot over the years. The only railway on the map is what we now call the Camp Hill line. That's sort of on the southeast of the map. On the high embankment. And the main effect here was really to hem the area in. But what we don't yet have at this time, we haven't got what we now call the Cross-City line running along the railway. That was opened in 1876. There's no Bourneville because there was no Cadburys, and it was Cadburys who invented the name Bourneville, let alone built it. They came in 1879. But there were still some farms there. Lee House Farm, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And further south was Ivy House Farm. And Ford House Farm as well. So some of these names at least survive, even if the farms don't. Okay, talking about farms, got another quiz question for you now. And that's, what is a tenanted farm? This is a sort of general knowledge question. I've given you three choices. So one where the farmer is a tenant, so not the owner of the farm. One that a farm that makes most of its income from tenants, or not a farm at all. So who thinks the first one, that it's where the farm's a tenant? Okay, some hands on that one. One that makes its income mainly from tenants. Some hands, or not a farm at all. Okay, well this time it's the first one that's right, A. A tenanted farm is one where the owner is not the person who actually farms it, the farmer effectively is the tenant. I'm told actually that tenanted farms came up in the budget, so the issue is quite contemporary. You have to ask your accountant about all the details of that one, what the implications were. But Lee House Farm, which is the closest to here, was tenanted, but Ivy House was not. It'd been owned by the Twigg family for as far as I know, for many generations. So what were all these people doing then, the people that were living here in 1851? So on the next slide, I've listed some of the occupations. We know what they did because from 1841 onwards, every 10 years, a census was taken of the whole country. So people's addresses were listed and their occupations. And some of these were what you would expect from a largely agricultural community. So there were several farmers, agricultural labourers, people that might be working on farms or making things for farms, wheelwrights, carpenters, this sort of thing, gardeners. The boatmen, they've been working probably based at the wharf where Pershore Road crosses the canal. There was a wharf there. Laundress, again, that sort of job. But also we had what might be called more industrial or more contemporary occupation, like coal dealer. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. The gun barrel borer and filer, there were quite a lot of those. And they were working at Hazelwell Mill because the firm of William Deacon and Sons were making guns there. So already there was a lot of industry in the area. Shopkeeper and grocer, of course, people needed that sort of basic infrastructure. Quite a lot of blacksmiths. A cordwainer, I took that one up, makes shoes. People making boots and shoes, that's a very long-standing occupation. A butcher, we'll talk about him in a minute. And a turnpike keeper, of course, not, I think, actually making the road, but simply collecting the tolls, working at the toll house. A lady called Anne Hancock had that role in 1851. So the butcher was the appropriately named Charles Lamb. So in 1851, he was only about 25 when he was running the shop. In fact, he's listed as butcher and grocer. And 10 years later, he was still here and described as a master butcher, and his wife Sarah was a shopkeeper. But to give an indication of the darker side of life, just the following year, Mr. Lamb was caught up in a rather unfortunate incident, which we know about from newspaper accounts of what happens. So it seems that one night, about 4 o'clock in the morning, that a police constable Place was on duty on the canal side near Selly Oak, and he saw 2 men carrying suspicious-looking bundles, and so coming up the towpath. And so he asked them what the bundles contained, and as it says, received an evasive answer. So he then challenged them a bit further, and one of the men ran off and then threw a stone at the policeman and knocked his hat off. So he got away, but the policeman seized the other man, and the man was called William Davis. And it turns out that when the policeman inspected what was in the bundle, he discovered, as reported, 4 pounds of tea, and in his pocket 7 silver teaspoons and 3 tablespoons, which he had subsequently ascertained or subsequently stolen from the house of Mr. C. Lamb, grocer and post office keeper. So now I know he ran the post office as well, so multitasking. Again, a bit like today, post offices fitted in wherever they can. So with the trial, it was said the items stolen included tea, tobacco and postage stamps and lots of other items as well. And actually, both the men were quite young. I think they were 18 and 21, but even then they had previous convictions. And so they were sentenced between them to 16 years penal servitude. So that was the, even though crime did not pay, evidently, in those days. But P.C. Place was commended for his conduct. I wouldn't fancy going down the canal towpath at 4 o'clock in the morning. So there you go. Anyway, you've heard enough from me. Well, I'm going to hand over to Sandra, who's going to talk about one of my favourite roads. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I thought it would be interesting to take a road in Stirchley and look at it through time. So I looked on a map and I discovered that Ivy Road was probably the shortest road in Stirchley. For those of you who aren't sure, Ivy Road is off the Pershaw Road, coming out of Birmingham. It's just on the opposite side of the road to the school, and it's next to Hazelwell Road that goes down towards what was the mill. And I thought, it's really short road, what a good idea. No, doesn't go anywhere. That was one of my issues. I had two issues with it, because you like to do just have a look round. Choosing a road that doesn't go anywhere isn't a good idea, because when you're doing your field work, you walk down the road and you start to feel people looking at you. So you turn round and you walk back up again, and everybody's looking at you. And it's like, and you're sitting there, and you've got a notebook in your hand as well. So they obviously think you're from the council, or case in the joint. I'm not sure which. But it was also one of the first roads that were developed in Stirchley, possibly because of the proximity to the mill, I think. Because we know it was developed between 1871 and 1881, because it's in the 1881 census, which is one of the major sources of information. Initially, there were only 33 households recorded. So, I was right, not quite so much information. By 1884, there was 40 houses, so it was obviously being developed over a period of time. The original houses were built in blocks of up to 5 houses. Each block shared a water pump for fresh water in the back garden, and probably shared a toilet or toilet block. Each house had 3 rooms and a scullery. A scullery is a bit like a kitchen, but without any running water or possibly even a sink. So not quite the kitchen as we know it. Because we know they got their water from a pump, it means that the water came from a well, from underground. So there was no piped water, which means it's unlikely that they had flush toilets, because you can't have a flush toilet without a water pipe. So they, well, and I'm not going to go into what the arrangements might have been. I actually went to an event on Saturday where we spent all day talking about water and toilets, so I could wax lyrical, but I won't. One interesting fact is that in 1895, which shows you how the road was still being developed, William Alexander Harvey, who became the chief architect for the Bourneville Estates the following year, designed 2 houses in Ivy Road for a Mr. Mason. I think these were numbers, what are current numbers, they do change. The current numbers 40 and 42, known as Buxton cottages. It looks like they were built at the same time because they shared a passageway. And number 44, which is now known as Holly Cottage. And these houses, all 3 of them, were bigger than the others. They had 5 rooms and a scullery. It just shows how things developed over time. One thing that we're not sure, and if anybody's got any ideas, let me know, is why a block of houses on the north or odd-numbered side of the road are called Bowling Green cottages. There is no evidence of a bowling green anywhere nearby. So if anybody's got any ideas or manages to winkle something out, please let me know, because, you know, it's just an interesting little fact. By 1911, which is the last census I actually looked at, because you have to pay for the 1921 census, so it's not ideal when you're trying to do a whole road, because you have to pay for each one that you look at. The road numbers seem to have settled down by then, except that numbers 8 to 18 didn't exist anymore. And I think that's why they would have been demolished to make way for the factory. So some of you may remember the Whitmarley factory, which was the latest on the site. An earlier factory was H&E Halfords, called General Manufacturing, and on the adverts they seem to, you ask them and they would make it for you, as far as I could gather. You know, they could sew things for you, they could make things. A very interesting company, I think. The 1911 census shows a variety of occupations and places that people worked at. So, not surprisingly, a lot worked at Caton and Heaton Rubber Mill, which was in the mill, and there was a footpath from the end of Ivy Road to where was the mill, which is now the industrial estate. Obviously Cadbury's, why wouldn't you work there? A variety of metal workers, several gardeners, quite surprisingly, an insurance agent, a chimney sweep, and a coalman employed by the co-op. We're going to the co-op a bit more later. And the adults were born in a number of places, which suggests there are people coming into Stirchley from other places. One was born in Ceylon, but he was called George Hanley. He was 58, and he stated he was British by parentage. So obviously his parents happened to be in Ceylon rather than him being from Ceylon. The Janes family at number 3, which I think is the first house, noted that all 7 of their children that were still living at home were born in Ivy Road. So they'd obviously, and the eldest was 18, so they'd obviously lived in Ivy Road for about 20 years, at least by that point. The head of the family was Thomas Janes, Thomas Jr., who I assume is his eldest son, which means they had at least 8 children. He was called general labourer, and he lived at number 9 with his wife Alice, daughter Nellie, and a son who very imaginatively is also called Thomas. They seem to do that a lot. Looking, as I say, I haven't gone into the 1921 census. You can use the 1939 register, which is a bit more open and a bit able to see. And by then, 4 families from the 1911 were still living in Ivy Road in 1939, which is quite interesting. I looked at some other information, because census is great, doesn't give you the personal thing. So because when I was doing this in 2018, it was the end of the First World War commemorations, so there was a lot of information. So I went onto the War Graves Commission website where you can search by road name, and I discovered there were 2 soldiers who died who had an address in Ivy Road, which is out of 43 households, probably about what you'd expect. Unfortunately, one of them is Thomas James Jr., and from number 9, who died on the 13th of November 1916, and he's commemorated at the Threepville Memorial. Probably died in the Battle of the Somme, and most likely has no grave, because most of them on the actual memorial are named there because there isn't a grave. If there is a grave, they give you a nice photo on the War Graves Commission website, which is very nice of them. The other man is a man called Henry Alfred Goodman, whose mother is recorded as living at 9 Ivy Road. And we know that Alice's mother, Thomas's wife, she lived with them. And I think we can assume that poor Alice James managed to lose both her husband and her younger brother in the First World War. And it was the only house in Ivy Road that is mentioned in there. As Phil's mentioned, newspapers can be quite helpful. Unfortunately, they only seem to put the bad news in the newspapers. If it's the good news, it's like an anniversary, and you think, well, that's a bit boring. So I found 2 mentions. One is from the 19th of December 1916 that mentions in the Birmingham Police Court before the stipendiary magistrate, Martin Flynn, age 37, because you always have to put the age, of 23 Ivy Road, was sentenced to 6 weeks imprisonment for stealing 200 weight of coal belonging to W.H. Lane and Son, coal merchants of Kings Norton. He actually worked for the carter that was transporting the coal. It's not entirely clear whether his employer, that actually was in Selly Park, one gets the impression that maybe they were in it together, but his employer got off, basically. And I'm sure they're all long dead, so it doesn't matter if I'm slandering anybody. The other one is from the 31st of August 1916, and it's a report of an inquest, so you know it's not going to end well. And the heading is "Fallen Under a Furniture Van." And it concerns James Brettle, aged 3, who lived with his parents in 43 Ivy Road. And it says that he and a number of other children were walking behind a furniture van in Hunts Road, virtually next door, on the 26th of August. He was swinging a tin can, which must have come out of his grip, rolled under one of the wheels of the van. He tried to get the can away and fell under the wheels, which passed over his head and fractured his skull. He died the next day in the Queen's Hospital with a verdict of accidental death. And the 1911 census shows that his parents were James and Florence Brettle, And at that time, they had 3 daughters. Must have been just before he was born. They had 3 daughters, the youngest of which was 4 months old, and he was 3 in 1916, so they were coming along quite quickly, I think. But it is interesting to note that there was emergency medical treatment available pre-NHS, because he was carted off to a hospital. I'll just conclude by saying that oral evidence can add a lot to the documentary evidence. And in 1989, there was a local history project carried out in Stirchley, and 3 sisters who had lived in Ivy Road took part in the project. One remembered that her family felt themselves to be lucky in that they had a toilet that they didn't share with anyone else. Even it was outside, it wasn't in the house, but it wasn't shared. And unlike some houses opposite, and they had a tap out. It was outside, but it was a tap, it wasn't a pump. So that suggests by now also the toilets may have become flushing as well. And they said it was really much of an improvement. These 3 ladies were actually the sisters of James, who fell under the furniture van. So they obviously survived, thrived, one assumes. This is work in progress. As I say, there was a factory, and for anyone who remembers the road, it was also home to Swan coaches at the very end of the road. It was a coach, how they got the coaches, why they thought it was a good idea, and how they got them down that road and back out again, I have no idea. Not surprisingly, I don't think it survived too much into the modern era. Now it's the site at the very bottom of the road, which is the site of the new houses. Right, I think it's you now, isn't it?
Yes, okay. Yes, thank you very much, Sandra. So Sandra's spoken about a very short road, going over quite a long period of time. We also, some years ago, we had a look at Bourneville Lane, which obviously is very, very close to here. You all know where that is. And we went through the census in 1911 just to get some sort of feel for who was living there and really what jobs they were doing, because this was much more a commercial area. There were lots of cafes and shops and that sort of thing. And so this shows on the north side. This is the side where the library and the bars now are. Just, I won't go through them all, but some of the occupations there. But things like boot repairer, caterers. There was a van man and a house furniture. They're actually father and son, next door to each other. It turned out one of the owners of one of the cafes actually was born in India, which made us wonder, was that Stirchley's first curry house? I suspect more likely it would have been meat and veg, as per what British people would have expected at the time. Also quite satisfying to discover that there's a fish dealer in the same the place that is now the Bourneville Fish Bar. So that's nice to find out things like that. But we've got things like a gold ring maker next door to a hairdresser, machinists, lots of people working at Cadbury's, obviously with the cocoa manufactory and chocolate makers, draper, boot repairer. And on the next slide, we've got on the other side of the road, a little bit short of that one. This is only going up as far as, I think, is it Lee House Road, the first road you come to. And again, you've got things like nougat maker, pawnbroker, stationary engineman. Actually, my great-grandfather did that job. He worked in a quarry, not here, but familiar with that job at least. Pikelet maker, that's a good one. Good way to make a living. Coalman working on a railway, jobbing gardener, baker and grocer. The feel you get is this is kind of a bit of a melting pot, really. Lots of people come to do different jobs, a kind of thriving area, lots of cafes, people running businesses in their own houses. It's also interesting that obviously these are the heads of the household, their occupations, but often the adult children were living and working there as well. There were at least 2 children, 2 daughters work as milliners. And also, some worked at the screw factory. That was Nettlefolds, which is down at the other end of Pershore Road, where it meets the canal. Of course, many worked at Cadbury's. There was one man further up the road. I think his job was handlebar filer, obviously making bicycles. But he had 4 daughters all working at Cadbury's. And it just shows how much Cadbury's brought to the area, in that the income they provided. Often in other places, maybe those girls would have had to gone away from home to find work, maybe work as servants, that kind of thing. But here they had good employment, actually right on the doorstep. So lots of sweet goods on sale, notice. No dentist, perhaps it's quite surprising, but there must have been some in the area. So perhaps it's not so different from today with all the cafes and things. Okay. And talking of sweets, over to Sandra again.
Me again?
Yes.
Yeah, I must admit, I don't quite remember it, although it didn't close till 1988. And this is Hutchins Sweet Shop, which is actually just over the road from here, in what some of us call the back street, but we should call it Hazelwell Street, I suppose, because people may not know what it is. And it's an illustration of how a lot of the shops in Stirchley operated. They were family businesses, open all hours, typical, except this was sweets rather than everything. But it was that sort of shop. Henry Hutchins, not the chap you see, this is the earlier generation, opened his sweet shop in 1914, having bought the equipment second hand for under £5. There was a sweet shop in Bourneville Lane, we think, so we're not quite sure whether the dates fit, whether he might have bought it from the shop in Bourneville Lane. You'd like to think that he probably did. He worked at Cadbury's, which is handy if you want to run a sweet shop, until the 1920s, and he made sweets in his spare time while his wife ran the shop. After 1920, he dedicated himself to sweet making full-time, except he did have to do part-time work to support the income. They made sweets 1 day a week and worked from 9 till 9. His wife and daughter were expected to help, and by wrapping caramels, they presumably were the only ones that needed wrapping, I don't know, by hand, and washing and polishing the sweet jars. The daughter also helped by making lollipops. Henry made the wooden sticks, which were pressed into a 1-inch cube of molten mixture and then pressed out flat by hand. Who knew how to make a lollipop? So if you ever want to know, we know we've got the description. Mrs. Hutchins made ice cream in a zinc bucket that sat in a wooden tub of ice and salt in order to cool it. The tub had a lid with paddles which you had to stir by hand, bit like making butter, and the ice was delivered to the shop in big blocks. So Mrs. Hutchins spent a while hammering away at the blocks to make it into more manageable chunks of ice. It's a whole different world, isn't it? The ice cream was then kept in the tub under the shop counter. It doesn't say how often she had to do this. I can't believe that it stays cool very long. I don't think it kept for a week, for example. They made their own brand of sweets, including invalid toffee, chest and lung drops, pear drops, acid drops, raspberry drops, and troche. They also made a special candy for a local beekeeper that he put in his hives when he removed the honey to keep the bees happy. In 1943, Henry sold the business to his nephew, George. And they moved away into Wales, but their daughter stayed on the shop for a little while to help George out. He continued until 1988. And when the shop closed, the machinery was donated to the Black Country Living Museum, where you can see it now in the sweet shop, and there's a little plaque that says it came from a sweet shop in Stirchley. So if you do go to the museum, make a point of going to have a look. Sorry? Yeah, well, there you go. Well, there you go. And apparently the equipment included sweet rollers, a humbug hook, which is actually in the ceiling, ice lolly moulds, a scoop, a sieve, pans, and a stool. So you know what to look for if you go. And the description of what I've given you has come from the Black Country Living Museum, a description that they made when they acquired the information. Unfortunately, they didn't take any photographs of it in situ in the shop. In 1988, they didn't do that. They will have done later on, I'm sure. So I think I'm coming on to Grant Estates, aren't I? Yeah. I just thought we'd better have a quick word on the Grant Estates. Some of you may know the name Grant, if only from the pub, which is in what we would almost think as Cottridge. And you've got Councillor HMR Grant there as well. They developed a lot of this area, including Lee House, Victoria and Alexandra Roads, Hazelwell Road, Wallish Road and the terraces that came off it. Also what we know as Little London and most of that part of Bourneville Lane. There were 2 brothers and 3 sisters who came from Leicester. Why they came to Birmingham, I've got no idea. And where the money came from initially to set the family up as developers, we don't know. The father had been a soldier and he met the mother when he was serving in Ireland, and they came over to this country back again when he retired. So your guess is as good as mine where the money came from. They built terraced housing, which, I don't know if anybody of you lives in any of them, they are known as tunnel backs. So if you live in them, you know why. If you don't, then you need to go and look at the back of some houses because you can see why. And most of the houses they built, they rented. And they rented to respectable working class people. If you weren't respectable, you didn't stay as their tenant, apparently. Their developments actually were easy to spot, and if you know what you're looking for, you will see them now. For one main reason, in that every road they developed had a corner shop. They weren't all typical corner shops. One on the corner of one of the corners in Little London at one point was a pie clit shop. For people who don't know what a pie clit is, they tend to be called a crumpet now rather than a pie clit. And you can tell, because you can usually tell, if you look carefully, you can see where the doors have been blocked, where the shop doors have been blocked up or things have been moved. So you just use your imagination. Apparently in 1907, they carried out £61,000 of work in Stirchley because they were really at the height of their development. Part way through the development of Little London, which is the Oxford Regent Street area, the eldest brother, Thomas, passed away, leaving Henry, the younger brother, HMG, to run the company with the help of the oldest sister, Mary Ann, who lived at home and never married and always lived in Cottridge. Grant Estates, the lettings part of the business, was run by another sister, Margaret's husband, John Dixon, and after he passed away, the nephew, John Dixon Jr., another family with a lot of imagination, obviously. We think this became eventually Dixon's estate agents because we're not sure if it's exactly the same as the one that's in existence now because that's gone through various amalgamations, so we're not quite sure. As you can see, HMR Grant was a councillor, which is very helpful if you're a developer. I cast no aspersions. And as a councillor, he laid the foundations stone for Stirchley Library. They did not donate the land. Cadbury's donated the land. They didn't do that. Two of the sisters, the one who stayed in the area, were milliners and apparently made hats for the royal family. And they sent hats down to Buckingham Palace. And I've also heard from a local person that they were also involved in soft furnishings because they used to send work out for some of their tenants for soft furnishings. Strange world, really. They developed the properties that are known as Bourneville Market in Bourneville Lane, which were all shops. They were developed as shops, hence the name. Not too much of a mystery. Until very recently, it was possible to decipher a wooden sign behind one of the shops telling people that the passageway was private and owned by Grant Estates. Do not come down this passageway, or else. Someone has given us sight of a bill for furniture from the 1930s.
Yes, should be the next slide. So,
Yeah.
yes, so talking respectable
There we
household.
go.
Yes,
There we go.
yes.
And this is for a terraced house in Little London. The cost is about £100, which is some £6,000 in today's money. So if you're getting married, it's a lot of money to put together a new household. There you go.
Yes, just as they talk of respectable households, the house was actually owned by the parents of one of our history group members, who gave this this to us. Was it 1933? I think it was.
Doesn't say.
I think
it says 1930s, but it hasn't.
Yes.
Got,
No, I've got an idea. It was about then. Anyway, so still a fair bit to get through. Can we talk about the canal as the next thing? So next slide should be a photo of the old of the toll house there. So I took that photo in 2015. I'm very glad I did, because in 2019 the toll house was gutted by fire, two fires actually, and it's now been restored. But the reason for the photo then, it was the 200th anniversary of the completion of the Worcester and Birmingham Canal. But actually our bit along here was built in the 1790s. So by 1797 I think they got as far as Hotwood, and then after that, the canal company ran out of money. It took a long time to build the bit down to Worcester, but we don't need to worry about that, because that's their problem. So our bit was here, was here first. We have a very local connections. If you walk up, you may know, if you walk up Bourneville Lane, you've got, just when you get to the aqueduct, there's got that pathway going up to the right. And if you look behind, there's some railings on the left, and you can see the foundations of a house there. And that belonged to the Sparry family. They were coal dealers. So John Sparry actually founded the firm in about 1850, moved there, but it's actually his son William who then took on the business and actually ran it until he died in 1909. And I think on the next slide we've actually got a list of addresses. So talk about, it was called Sparry's Wharf, and I just put that up because remember I said we got a census every 10 years. Every census had a different name for the same place. Again, just showing how time changes things. The Aqueduct, Stirchley Street, Coal Wharf, Bournebrook Road. Bournebrook was actually not where Bournebrook is now, but it was actually demolished by Cadbury's. It's where it became the ladies' recreation ground. 117 Stirchley, just a number. Coal Wharf, 12 Bourneville Lane, but not the present number 12, because most of the road hadn't been built then, and then just the wharf. So the business was there for several decades until William died. But again, to show the sign of the times, by the time he died, there were 4 children living in the house, 3 of whom were working at Cadbury's. So the Sparrows were coal dealers, but the canal actually carried a lot more than that. So one of the coal was certainly the biggest commodity that was carried, but lime was also used widely, both for building and agriculture. So that was a very common thing to be carried. Bricks as well. The canal company itself actually built several brickworks to build its own structure. So something like 10 million bricks were used to build the tunnel at Kings Norton, and they sold bricks to other companies as well. And also food, because in fact when the canal was built, one of the aims was to be able to bring food from Worcestershire into Birmingham. So that would have been important. But in 1853, the Borough of Birmingham Night Soil Department found another use for the canal, offered manure for sale you could buy from Mr. Sparry at Stirchley Street Wharf at 5 shillings per wagon load. So that was another commodity that was carried on the canal. Hopefully not on the same boats as the fruit.
And I said I wouldn't mention toilets.
Yes, I know. I'm sorry. Yes, sorry about that. This went on for some time, but in 1879, I mentioned that we keep talking about the Cadburys, they come up again and again. So the big boys moved in then. So Richard and George Cadbury had been looking in the city centre looking for somewhere new to expand their business. They were both very ambitious, as I think we probably all know. And they took over this site where the Sparrows had been. They built walls, they built even their own private railway to bring goods into their factory. George Cadbury actually was a huge canal enthusiast. He actually became chairman of the canal company in later life. So the canals remained important for carrying goods until well into the 20th century. really until really it's the roads actually that finally did for them. I think this is an aerial photo, probably taken about in the 1930s, maybe a bit later. So you can just see, just off to the left there is where the aqueduct is, and on the right you can see where now Sparrow Drive is, and that little estate. But that was now then operated by Cadbury's, and beyond that is the Cadbury factory. So you can see, of course, now it's all obscured by all the poplar trees have grown up, which are wonderful to see, but they hadn't grown up then. So the canal actually served this area very well until the war came. On the 4th of December 1940, a bomb fell through the canal, and in fact it landed very unluckily actually on the aqueduct and punctured a hole in it. Now, there's a photo that's very often put online showing the view from below, but this actually is a view from above. It was taken a few weeks later when they started repairing it. So you can see the hole actually in the canal there, looking down into the tunnel underneath. But opposite is the house where the Sparrows lived. It was still there. And just a memory, in the history, again, a local history project, a lady called Dorothy Perks remembered what had happened in the bombing. I won't read it out, but she just describes how her mother was actually sitting on the settee when the bomb fell. Says she was blown to her feet with a newspaper over her face. Normally they hid under the stairs during bombing. For some reason they didn't, and she remembered the water rushing down the street quite a few feet deep. I think that the factory also, the Bourneville factory, suffered quite severe flooding, and lots of people had to be rescued. She said the houses didn't suffer much damage apart from all the middle windows being blown out all the way down the street. Okay, back to Sandra. Talk about Tascos.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that when the bomb happened and all the houses got flooded, the Cadburys used a family trust, the Burker Trust, to make sure that everybody who had been flooded got a bag of coal, because it was wartime. Coal was very difficult to get and expensive, and they made a decision, because although there were Cadbury workers involved, they gave the coal to every household that was affected, not just the Cadbury workers, and they also gave them what other help they needed, because obviously having your house flooded is never good at the best of times.
I know, it's happened to me.
So, 10 Acres and Stirchley Cooperative Society, otherwise known as Tascos, or various variations of how you pronounce it, was of great importance to Stirchley residents, and also from those outside Stirchley, in particular those from Selly Park, where they had no shops to speak of. Their main shopping centre was here in Stirchley. It started from one, and I'm not even sure it was a shop, in Hazelwell Street, which is now, it's a place that's no longer there. And at its peak, it had a large department store, which some of you will have seen photos, some of you might actually remember, on the corner of Umberslade Road. A dairy, a bakery, funeral directors, dentist, chemist, butchers, one of the first self-service food stores in the area. It also had warehousing, an education hall, and offices, and various branches as far away as Bromsgrove, and a lot of the branches, for example the one in Kings Norton, had a hall above that could be used for community purposes. So they were very much part of the fabric of society, and it really did cater from the cradle to the grave. So it sold baby clothes, and it had the funeral directors, and it did, and a lot of people used the hall for wedding receptions. So it definitely, everything, it was there for them. So, who can say where the Stirchley's only blue plaque is sighted?
Yes, that's the plaque.
That's the plaque. That's not in sight. That was.
That's when
they always unveil them where they can put them, because they're usually on walls, so they always unveil them where they can. So who knows where it actually is? So if we go on to the next one.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. There it is.
It is on Pershore Road.
It's on Pershore Road,
Yes.
just opposite Hunch Road. And it was put there because it's the site of the former Co-op Central Bakery. Most of the other places either aren't in existence or are in very strange corners. This was the most public place that we could think of. And Mary Cottrell, who's commemorated, was involved initially in the Cooperative Women's Guild, and a lot of women learnt how to speak, how to conduct meetings, how to give speeches through the Cooperative Guild. She became the first female member of the Taskers Board. She went on to be the first female member of the board of the Cooperative Wholesale Society, which was the national organisation which coordinated co-ops. And she was the first female councillor on Birmingham City Council in 1917, standing for the Labour and Cooperative Party. Unfortunately, not in her own name, because she was married. She was put on the ballot paper. I can't remember what her husband's name is, but whatever her husband's name was, she was Mrs. Henry Cottrell, for example. She wasn't allowed to use her own first name. How sad is that? I think it's you now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think perhaps we ought to move on to the snooker photo, actually.
Okay.
Yes. Do you mind just stepping over, Mark, the one showing the snooker tables? We're going to ask people if they know where it is. That one.
There you go. Sorry? It's where that photo was taken. No. No. For anyone who knows, the clue is those metal pillars.
It's the pillars, yeah.
That are holding the ceiling up.
But they're like got sort of ridges around the outside.
And it was taken in 1925. Under here.
Yes.
And I can tell you they were still there in the early 1960s, and I think they're the same tables. So just a brief rundown of this building. There is some more information in the building. And it was built around 1892 by Cadbury's. On the wall on the other side, opposite the British Oak, it actually calls it a Friends Meeting House. But it was also an institute and a coffee shop. And the coffee shop was open to the public for people visiting Stirchley, as people did, obviously. Other rooms were used for evening classes, social gatherings and meetings. And between 1913 and 1919, it was used by Cadbury's as the girls' day continuation school. And we have had evidence of a suffrage meeting being held here, probably in this room, about votes for women. I suspect that was probably just before the First World War when it first became a good continuation school. And apparently, the first cinema in the district was started in this building in an upper room in 1908, which predates the Empire Cinema, details of which are over there. The upper hall was used by a lot of different organisations, dance schools, hired by Cadbury's and Taskers for social events, all sorts of things. I have a personal connection. In fact, I have two personal connections to this building. Like a lot of people in the 1950s and the early 1960s, my parents came to dances here. And this is where they met. This room was where my parents met. And there used to be a lot of people in Stirchley who used to be able to say that. My father told me that it was a dry building. So all the girls were up here, lemonade, whatever they could get hands on. The lads, I understand, used to use the back stairs, and they used to slip out the back door, across to the British Oak, have a drink, and then come and rejoin the girls who dutifully had all stopped in here. And they did that several times in the evening, and nobody seemed to notice they'd gone. But there you go. In the early 1960s then, my mother became a cleaner here, and because I was too young to stay at home, during the school holidays, I had to come with her. And if you remember the snooker tables, they had these nice ornamental legs. And my job was to dust the legs of the snooker tables, which is why I know they were here. And this is another 1920s photo. And it was as a result of seeing this photo that we managed to get the little island reinstated in Bourneville Lane. If you remember, it used to be a terrible, really wide to cross. And by looking at that photo, we could see that it used to have a little island. So we managed to get it reinstated. So it's always useful for the history to come together.
Okay, yes.
And we won't mention the Taboo nightclub.
Right, no, okay. Right, we're nearly at the end now. So obviously I'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. But it's going to end on a bit of a sad note in some ways. We've got to come up, the next slide should show, this is a set of pawn tickets. There is a reason why we're ending with this. These were found in a house in Lee House Road, and they were between 1899 and 1902, showing really the darker side of life in some ways. So this family were pawning a lot of their household goods, because obviously they were very short of money. So they were pawning, things like shoes, a skirt, and things of this sort. And what's especially sad is that some were pawned by the mother, but also some were pawned by the daughter, Agnes, who was only about 12 at the time. In fact, on the next slide, we've got a bit more detail of two of them. I think one of them is of a skirt and one is of a shoe. So it's awfully sad, to think that people were doing this kind of thing. However, the person who was doing quite well out of this was a pawnbroker. His name was Albert Edward Scott. The shop originally was in Hunts Road, but then from the address he actually moved round the corner onto Pershore Road. We don't know exactly where because, of course, all the numbers have changed. This was it, but later he moved to Cheltenham and was working as a pawnbroker and jeweller, so evidently doing quite well. And in fact, this seems to be a bit of a problem of family, because a few years earlier they'd been living in the middle of Birmingham, and the father actually had been given a legal notice saying that he must send his daughter to school, that she was skipping school, and he was obliged. They said, you must go to this school. And so obviously the family were going through quite a difficult time. However, there are two messages from this. One, just going back to that plaque. Top history tip is to look up along the street, because, of course, shop fronts change all the time. As we know, Stirchley is a constantly changing area, which is great in many ways. We've got so many wonderful businesses and things happening here. But if you look up, you see all these sort of inscriptions and plaques and things that don't change, and they tell a whole story themselves. And in some cases, look down as well. There are people who look at things like gratings in the road and manhole covers and that sort of thing, and they can tell a story. But also, I forget the name of the shop, but there's one where you've got the Tascos logo actually in the in like a mosaic on the floor in the shop entrance. But the other thing from this is search your houses. If you've got anything in the attic or old newspapers, anything, whatever it might be, it could be something of great interest, not necessarily material value, but of historical value, because it all tells us something about what life was like in former times. So I guess
these were brought in by somebody who found them under the floorboards in their house. So if you're carrying out work on your house or exploring your loft, because that's always a good place to look, and you uncover something, whatever it is, cigarette packets turn up quite often as well, usually woodbines for some reason, then by all means, get in contact with us. We can either keep them if you don't want them, and we have got a few items that we've acquired that way, or we can take photographs and put them with our archives so that we can keep them.
Yes, yeah. And in fact, I remember when Sandra talked about Tascos, there was a photo of a shop awning. That was actually recovered during a renovation, actually of a small corner shop in Selly Park. That was yet another Tascos venue, so they were everywhere. Okay. Anyway, I think we'll pause there, and so shall we take questions if people have any? Yes. So feel free to ask, and we'll do our best.
I mean, the display over there is some of the things we haven't mentioned, because we can't mention everything. So
yes, there's some really big topics. We've not talked about the baths, the library, pubs, all sorts of things. But there's a bit more information over there. The police station. I know we had to
cinemas.
miss that bit out. Yes.
You name it.
It's such a busy area. There's so much history here. So Yes. Yes.
Unfortunately, I missed the beginning of your presentation, so you may have covered this, but have you mentioned about any origins of street names? For example, why is it called Ivy Road?
We don't
Yes.
know for sure. I think Ivy Road was because it was by the farm. It's difficult. A lot of them, because they're the later ones. I mean, Victoria and Alexandra are queen, names of the queens, so they're quite obvious. Lee House Road because of the farm that was on site. Little London, we think, it seems as though the elder Grant, who was developing it when he died, spent time in London. The only person I found in the census in London of the same name and the same age was a civil servant. So, how he made, probably best not to inquire how he made his money.
Yes.
I live at number 19, and Little London was built by a London builder.
No.
Well, I've got paperwork that says it was.
Yeah, it depends where you are. But after he died, they hadn't finished the development, and the part of the development that they hadn't finished, they developed in a different way. So a lot, the two main roads, they developed what they always did. So they built the houses, rented them, kept them. But part of that development was let out as building leases. And so it was grant land, but they actually gave other people the right to build. A lot of the other roads in Stirchley were done the same way, but by different developers. They all had different ways of doing things, depending on whether they got any money for a start off. If they hadn't got the money to build, they got money in by somebody else building. So that's mine. I've seen some deeds in that area as well. So that's why I know it varies.
Yeah. Thanks. And actually, sorry.
Ron, if you want to say something, can you come forward? Because I can't hear you back there.
Everybody else be able to.
Okay.
For you. I wonder still, what was the date in 1940 that the canal got bombed? What was the actual date?
It was December. I think it was December 1940 was the date I found.
Was it by any chance December the 12th?
It was very close to that. The photo I showed was taken in the following in January.
That's coincidence, because that was if it's the 12th of December 1940, that's the date that the PSA factory in Harmony Road got bombed.
Yes.
There were a whole range of raids in November and December 1940. It was the peak for raids.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've got 4th of December down, but I haven't sort of fact-checked that. That's the date that was noted on one of the photos, yes.
They didn't put much in the newspapers, strangely enough.
You were talking about
Yes.
grants
Yeah.
estates, but did they also do a lot of developments around the London 1940 area as
Yeah.
well?
They did a lot of Cottridge. They actually lived in Cottridge, just opposite what is now the Grant Arms pub is where they lived. Where those flats are, that was their house, and the family had houses in the nicer part of Cottridge, if I put it that way. If you're the developer, I think you're not gonna live in Roeheath Road necessarily. I had two uncles who lived in Roeheath Road, so there's nothing against it at all.
Yes. Yes. Yes, sir.
Why was the station chose this name from Stirchley Street, Stirchley to Bourneville?
It went to Stirchley Street, then it went to Stirchley Street and Bourneville,
Yeah.
and then it was Bourneville because I think the overall impression was that most people using the station were actually in some way connected to the factory. And certainly, I did some research on the station for what we did for the Heritage Open Day. And one of the things that happened at the station was excursions that from all over the country to visit Cadbury's. By the 1930s, people were coming from all over the place. And so they might have thought, well, we're going to visit Cadbury's at Bourneville. Why are we going to Stirchley Station?
Yeah.
And I think it's because it was Cadbury's. You know, why wouldn't they exert pressure?
Yes.
I mean, it's taken us quite a long time to get back to the signs that say Bourneville for Stirchley. I
Yes.
mean,
That's right.
that took about 20 years of pressure
That's right. Yes.
in order to even get that far. I don't think they're going to rename it somehow.
They know they're going to try and call Pineapple Road at one point. One of the options for that was Stirchley.
I know.
Yes.
And I immediately voted against that. 'Cause
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, if you do that, people are going to turn up at the wrong station.
And
Exactly,
only
yes.
half of it is in Stirchley. Only one platform's in Stirchley. The other
That's how it's King's
platform's in King's Heath, and there
Yes.
is already a King's Heath
Only one
station.
platform's in King's Northern,
Yeah,
King's Northern Station.
yeah.
Yes.
Should be called Cottridge.
Yeah.
True. Yes, I know.
Technically, it should be
But
called
the
Cottridge.
grants hadn't developed Cottridge when they put the station there.
That's right. Yes. Yes. Yes, Paul. Yes.
Do we know whereabouts dancing started before? Because I'm wondering if you overlap the dancing took place in the Dell in West Park in the early part of the
Yeah.
20th century.
Yeah, the dancing took part in Munts Park in the summer, not much in the winter. I mean, I can remember there were when the lights and the bandstand was in Munts Park, a thatched bandstand. It's hardly surprising it didn't last really. I think this was a year-round thing. It did evolve, and they had a caretaker employed by Cadbury's to look after the building. He lived next door, and he was in charge of doing the bookings. And he's famous for turning the Beatles down. He said they would never amount to anything, and that's why they appeared in King's Heath, not here. We got the Rocking Berries here because they were local and everybody knew them and people would come and see them and it would all work well.
I've heard that story about the record producer. I didn't realise it was this local.
Yeah, well, they wanted to. They were promoting. I think it was probably the first record or the second one, and they wanted somewhere in the area. And he said, "No, you can't. You're not coming to my hall." Because either side here were the dressing rooms and a toilet, so that they could have bands and things like that. And then they had discos because it was cheaper. So towards the end, it was discos rather than live bands.
Going back to the Bowling Green in Ivy Road, I wonder if it was connected with the bowling green at the Headway Mill.
I don't know. I really don't know.
Wasn't there a bowls club down opposite here?
Yeah, but that was part of the park, which is way after they developed Ivy Road. Because it does appear that the stones with the name on were put there when the houses were built. They wouldn't normally put them on afterwards. And normally you'd think either they overlook a bowling green, or alternatively they're built on a bowling green. Well, they weren't built on a bowling green because it was a field. And there's just they were literally surrounded by fields when they were built. I don't think the British Oak had a bowling green. It wasn't the current building; it was an earlier building. But we have got some information about British Oak over there. If you want to have a look.
Yes.
We thought we'd go pubs and cinemas over there.
Yes. Yes. They couldn't cover everything.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Okay.
Well, let's give them a round of applause, guys. Thank you so much. It's really helpful, and I'm sure maybe learned something new this evening, maybe sparked some interest, and like they said, that there's a display over there. Please do have a look at that this evening. And yeah, if you want to find out more, please do speak with them afterwards as well when the groups meet, like they mentioned earlier. But just a couple of things for the rest of the weekend. So tomorrow the exhibition continues from 10 till 1. So the building's going to be open. We're focused primarily this evening in this room, but there's going to be lots of different things for you to do. So you can learn about the history of this church building. We've got a glimpse of that. Thanks, Sandra, for that, for downstairs and what this room's been used for in the past. So there'll be more of that, but we also want to connect with a little bit of the current as well. So there'll be local initiatives that are happening in the community are coming into the building, and you can find out about what's happening across the community. You can taste some of the local food as well. So we've connected with some of the businesses and some of the food chains up the high street. So you can maybe taste some samples as well if you want to do that. And yeah, just interact. There's maybe some prizes to be won as well. So if you want to, maybe some chocolate, or maybe we've seen some chocolate around. We've talked about Cadbury's a few times, so you can come along to that as well. And also, if you can't make it tomorrow, but you still want to come along and find out a bit more, then we'll be here again on Sunday afternoon from 2 till 4. Again, just some of those things that we're going to show and share in tomorrow's sort of experience. There's going to be a bit of a trail as well, a discovery trail throughout the building. You might have seen some signs even as you came into the building, wondering what that's about. So that'll all be revealed and explained more tomorrow. But thank you so much for coming out this evening. There's still a few drinks left as well. Thanks for those that have prepared that. Please do stay if you're able to just chat and connect maybe with Phil, Sandra, but others in the room. It's been great just hearing a little bit about Stirchley, the community, this building, and maybe some of those extra interesting facts was really good. So maybe can we just give Phil and Sandra a round of applause again, and thanks ever so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care. Thank you.